Bueno, ya le voy a decir al comunicador un rato.
Todo esto. Bioeconomía en la Amazonía y promoverla nos lleva a un futuro con más
qualidade de vida,
calidad de vida,
oportunidades
económicas y protección de la biodiversidad.
conexão,
Convergencia para la bioeconomía en la Panamazonía. Panamazonía en red. Foro de innovación e inversiones en la bioeconomía. Sean bienvenidos.
Welcome everyone.
sejam bem-vindos.
Boa tarde a todos. Eu sou Marcos
Good
Bessa,
afternoon, everyone. I am Marcos Bessa. I'm the co-founder of Beckman Impact Hub Manaus, and I'm going to be the facilitator.
E vamos ter hoje aqui conosco.
And today with us, we're going to have Fany from Cuenca. I'm going to invite her in a minute to talk about what she does, and Aldo Soto from Amazonia Impact Venture. But I'd like to give you some information about bioeconomy in the Amazon. So first of all, talking about the event. This event has the objective of making convergence and connection between the players and bioeconomy that benefits nature and the local communities. This is being done by the Pan-Amazonic Network, focusing on sustainable bioeconomy and the local populations, and the Inter-American Development Bank. As I said, the Impact Hub Manaus is global, and it works with social activities, and we are working in Brazil. We're the only impact hub in the Amazon, and we are working with the development of business and bioeconomy and socioeconomy. For us to know who is with us, I would like to now invite Fany so that she can tell us who she is and what organization she represents, talking a little bit about it first. Fany, welcome.
Gracias, Marcos.
Thank you, Marcos.
Bueno,
Well,
Fany Kuiru,
I am Fany Kuiru, and I am in the Colombian part of Amazon, and I work in COICA. It's the biggest indigenous organization that we have. It is in 9 countries, so it represents more than 511 different indigenous populations in the 9 countries. So would you like me to introduce myself and make my presentation? No, just introduce yourself and then we can start.
Obrigado.
All right. Thank you. And Aldo, can you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself and the Amazonia Impact Ventures, and welcome to our conversation. Hello, Marcos. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here at this event. And first of all, thank you very much to the network and the whole team behind it. It really seems an excellent organization, and this is such an important topic. I am Aldo Soto. I am the director and co-founder of Amazonia Impact Ventures. We're a company that focuses, an impact company that focuses on developing the Amazon. And in a minute, I'll say a little more about it. Thank you, Marcos. Thank you, everyone. And as I was saying, in this panel, we're going to talk about the mobilization of capital for bioeconomy in the Amazon and how we can work with the financial resources in the region and understand the mechanisms that are necessary and who is participating so that we can understand the demands of the ecosystem, not only in terms of infrastructure of the business, but also for the populations that live there. And bringing a little bit of our reality from the Impact Hub, we are currently forming partnerships with BG, and the focus is how do we actually look at bioeconomy in the Amazon more deeply, away from the large centers. So this is the focus. How do we get funding and how do we bring autonomy and knowledge for the local populations to make this financial resource advance in a significant manner? With this context and the topic, I would like to ask a central question so that we can work on the answer together. We have a very diverse audience from different countries, and I'd like to ask you, so in the scenario that we have in the Amazon, what are the opportunities and the challenges when we talk about the capital for bioeconomy? And what is your experience like considering these challenges and these opportunities? So we have bioeconomy in the Amazon. What are the opportunities and challenges? And what has your organization done? So, Fany, I'd like to hear you first, and then we will have Aldo.
Muchas gracias, Marcos.
Thank you very much, Marcos. Well, I would like to thank you for this time in the Pan American Network in bioeconomy. And as I was saying before, as a COICA, we are here not only symbolically, but we also have proposals and perspectives and our own instruments that are concrete to transform the bioeconomy in our territory. And we were in Belém do Pará, and since then we were already making a few proposals about what would be the indigenous economy in this great event. And we don't understand bioeconomy the way it is, but we've been talking about indigenous economy our whole lives. And our ancestors, when they still survived through the exchange of products and bartering. So this has not been lost. This is in the genetics of the indigenous people. So our economy is not a promise. It's not a promise of the future. It is an old and daily proposal that can only be transformed if we can deal with the population in the Amazon that have built and taken care of the Amazon for several generations. As Marco was saying in the beginning, the Amazon has diversity and it is very deep. Many times the directors of the indigenous population, they're able to get to these distant places and the states don't get there. And in the case of several states, they say, oh, this is another Colombia, this is another Brazil, because there's no state presence there. And this is the moment for us to really start transforming this region. And with this purpose in mind, we as COICA, we have a regional project for indigenous economy, a strategy that looks at the proposals of the indigenous communities, and we look at it differently in the region. And this program recognizes that you cannot talk about sustainability in the Amazon if the indigenous population does not count on territories and innovations without any identity. So we really have to transform this indigenous economy with effective participation of the indigenous people. And this is the call that comes from Belém do Pará with principles for the Amazon economy. We always say that we have people who depend on the ecological cycles and the promotion if we're going to talk about economy. And we should listen to nature. We should know what these indigenous people are thinking with regard to territories and culture, identity, and also with spirituality. And in this bioeconomy, we have this strategy, and this is the Amazon for Life. And this is an initiative that COICA has co-created with the Inter-American Development Bank. And we saw that we have this too. So this sector that comes close to what it happens in the corporation, this is an opportunity to change for us. It presents a change, a structural change, and how this is used for bioeconomy and for climate conservation. And for the first time, we have a mechanism that allows for access and auxiliary support, financial support for the communities that live further away with all of the different problems we have. And it seems to be economy, but this also guarantees actual impacts and what we need to happen in this territory. So talking about our indigenous fund for life, as I was saying before, for funding and the bioeconomy of the Amazon. So this works with co-governance. It's very important when you have funds to talk about the central part, which is the governance of this fund. And for us, it's a fund that has a shared governance. You also have indigenous participants. And what makes it different? What makes this fund different? It is the direct channeling of the financial resources without any intermediates. Because many times this intermediation ends up modifying the funds, and they don't get there clearly to the territories. And all of us who interact, we can see that there are many projects that have failed in this attempt, and some say, oh, there's a cemetery of projects and funding in the Amazon. So we basically move slowly so that we can do things well. And to not only to finance bioeconomy, but also to strengthen the structures and the organization capacity for the indigenous community and the people who live there. Because we don't only fund projects, governance projects and participation and technical and financial management of our organizations. We also have the territorial and cultural adaptation, because we have things that have to be adequate according to the context, always respecting the right to self-determination and the proprietary control systems. And there's also an integral view of economy. So over here, we look at indigenous economy, we talk about conservation, the territorial extension, knowledge, traditional knowledge systems, and also about technological innovation, and all of this within the same context. This governance architecture in the Amazon for Life, as I was saying before, COICA and all those who donate, they have a co-governance model that is transparent and it's culturally pertinent. So there is a direction a steering committee that is responsible for the strategy, for the planning, for the project. There is the supervision of the resources and evaluation of the impact of this funding. And in this governance committee, we have most of the indigenous people participating. Most of them are indigenous representatives, also representatives from the donor side, because the donors cannot be co-responsible. They can't only, give the money out and do whatever they like after that. There should be shared responsibility for these funds to be delivered and for them to generate an impact in the funding. So for us, it is very important to have this co-governance between the donor and COICA representatives. We also have an executive secretary in this steering committee, and this is the one that works together with the steering committee, and it carries out the actions, and it does the follow-up of the annual operational plan, and it also works with the operational part so that there can be technical implementation. And besides that, we also have consultative committees that are temporary. They're temporary because you don't need to be there all the time, but when it's necessary, you have specialized support concentrated on generating alliances as private investment. And just to give you an example, others can also be observed. People from the academic world, from civil society, they can also provide support so that these funds are used in the way we want them to be used. And this model talks about recognition in the climatic and in financial governance. There is a learning process involved with shared accountability, and this is in the territory of the Amazon. Our vision is implemented using 4 pillars. So autonomous governance from the companies, and also the indigenous knowledge, access to fair markets, and also the political incidents, so that the public policies and international cooperation can recognize and integrate this differentiated view of the Amazon. And that's why yeah, are you finishing? Your time is up. Anyway, so I will conclude and just comment that we have our own monitoring, we have our own indicators, the indicators of indigenous well-being in the Amazon. This has to be integrated. And also, as other people were saying, in the Pan-Amazonic Network, we're talking about capital. So when the regional area contributes to this, it is a project that is aligned to the indigenous communities, and there's criteria that impacts the cultural aspects and also the strategies that are developed bilaterally, and they're also very transforming. So to conclude, we always talk about, well, we cannot talk about bioeconomy or projects in the Amazon if we don't have these caretakers that have been there for thousands of years, the indigenous population in this case. Thank you. Fany, thank you very much for your explanation. There are several points that I want to go back to and ask you afterwards, but what really called my attention the most is when you said it's a direct channeling of the resources, and it goes straight to the indigenous populations, and then we're going to hear from Aldo, but I want to know what this experience has been like of these resources getting directly to the hands of the indigenous population. So, Aldo, I would like you to describe your context now and how the Amazonia Impact Ventures works with with the possibilities in the Amazon. Bring us some cases of how you've done this in all of these years of experience. Marcos, of course, thank you very much. Thank you. Definitely the challenges, there are many, and we have navigated and visited different regions. We know how difficult it is to work there. And as from interconnection, the cultural gaps, it's really very complex. But of course, there are many opportunities. And besides that, it is necessary to survive the planet, and we have to work even more and mobilize resources for the Amazon. And these resources, as Fany said, should get to the guardians, the caretakers that have been there for thousands of years, taking care of this forest. So I'd like to tell a story. It is a personal story inside my work in the Amazon. So I've been working with communities in the central forest of Peru, and these communities are located in an organization based on COICA. And when I started, they already had a life project, so living well, that was the project. And they had challenges there, and one of the solutions, considering the poverty or the lack of economic resources, was exactly to constitute an association or a cooperative that would allow us to commercialize the cocoa that they produced in the region in a more direct manner, so with the buyers. As we know, in the Amazon, there's a difficulty in terms of connection. There are many intermediates that get close to the communities and they sell their products directly and with a name and a region. But these intermediates, what they did in this case was, in this story, in this community, and this happened in the Amazon. So they bought cocoa at a low price, so a ridiculous price, and they paid. They were actually tricked in the moment of payment in the weight of the products, and they sold. Well, they sold batteries to the communities and medication and clothes, and they were overpriced. All these things were overpriced. And the communities were tired of this injustice and years of this kind of commerce. So I was there checking the cooperative that was being born, improving the production of cocoa in terms of quality, and we created our own brand. And this is recognized in Peru currently and also internationally, and they can export directly to America and at a good value, and they can pay the price of cocoa. And it's also it's very aromatic, and a lot of effort is given to that. These are communities that protect the forest, and that's why I see the power that this organization has, an organization like a cooperative, and it includes small producers, and it can also connect to the market and finally make the economy run because of that. So I saw with these communities how these communities improved their revenues, and of course they were able to grow a lot and acquire assets for the cooperative and support other areas as well, not necessarily the area for the production of cocoa. And based on that, there's this inspiration to create the Amazonia Impact Ventures with the logic of being able to mobilize capital for the Amazon and to get to these small producers and indigenous people. And those that have very difficult access for funding. And in this story, the main challenges are being able to get their first credit. So this was very difficult, and nobody wanted to open up their doors. Everybody, closes their doors to them. And how are we going to get $80,000 in a loan? And without this, we cannot export the cocoa containers. So they decided to make a foundation. This foundation was the first one that believed in this project and made the funding. And based on this experience, we created Amazonia Impact Ventures to finance this type of cooperatives, so cooperatives of small producers, indigenous producers, and structuring their credit in a functional way so that it will work for the business, for the communities. But of course, we are not an NGO. We're a private company that will be sustainable over time. That's the idea. And this kind of credit should have a focus where there is profit for us who participate in these funds, but we invest with our own resources, and this has to be manipulated in a responsible way. The capital should come back to the fund so that this can be loaned once again to these same companies or different ones too. So this is part of our strategy, and this is where we're going with this fund, and we've already been working for 5 years, especially in Peru, but also with some credits in Ecuador and Colombia. And our objective is to grow over the next few years, grow even more to other countries and regions, the other areas of the Pan-Amazonic region. And we also need to have access to catalytic resources that are going to allow us to get more resources for the Amazon. And now I will give the floor back to you, Marcos, and it's a pleasure to be here with you in this conversation. Thank you. Thank you, Aldo. Thank you for your introduction. And it's interesting to hear because the three of us are in different Amazons and we're facing very similar challenges, right? So there's a brief explanation that I'd like to do before the next question. But every time we hear investment that is for the population of the Amazon or for the Amazon, it's always very high tickets, right? And it is not according to the Amazon reality. They need smaller tickets. They need a smaller amount to be able to prosper and advance. And it also comes in the way of, how are they going to scale up these businesses? Are they going to grow, go into other markets? And as Fany said, the Amazon is cyclical. We're not always going to be able to scale things up and make a culture be taken to several other places. And I always like to say that there's an impact in the depth because they're not going to access several markets or occupy several spaces. It's going to cause a positive impact and an in-depth impact in the community where it is. And there are those that can be scaled up and they're going to be replicated in other places. And for this, you need different sorts of investments, different mechanisms, and this money needs to get there in a way. How can you mobilize it? In this reality that we have in the Amazon. And you talked about something that I thought was very interesting. So take the intermediaries. So have the money go straight to the indigenous populations. And I'd like you to tell us how this experience has been and how you actually got to these populations and What is the relationship of this population with this sort of investment available that makes them move forward, that makes the bioeconomy? Bioeconomy is not something new, it's something traditional, it's very old. It is a daily practice of the indigenous population, and everybody is seeing this as an innovation, right? So I'd like you to tell us about how the money has arrived and talk about this relationship with the indigenous population and about the financing that goes to them. Thank you very much, Marcos. In fact, well, the Amazon for Life has this strategy because from the beginning, we had thought the following. There are funds that instead of going into the accounts of the organizations like Cuenca, we just decided to make it more autonomous, as if it were an autonomous fund. And even if it's true, even if it participates, if Cuenca participates in this fund and the people who cooperate, the idea is for these funds to be channeled to the organizations, and as a result, we can do an articulated work for the organizations. We have several points here. It's not only telling the organization that we have to work on this indigenous economy. No, in fact, we have to work together to be able to know how to find a way for the resources to get there correctly, to get to the extremities, thinking about the projects. And we have experiences here. Previous experience, we have worked with the support of the BID and an NGO. We did a mapping of all the indigenous enterprises. So we started checking out what was happening in our region. And with this issue of the enterprises, so it was the strengthening of the communities and the organizations. So we identified these enterprises, and the funding was channeled directly through the organization for these entrepreneurs, so that it was financed directly. So the money does not stay in the middle of the way with the administration or maybe in the part of the budget of a startup. No, it goes directly to the preservation project. So for example, if we're talking about the funding of economic enterprises, then we do the work, and behind that, and the money gets to the people involved, so it doesn't stay in the middle of the way. And until now, we've been working with organizations that are affiliated to Cuenca. We've been working with Fany and also with the process of listing and how to receive the funds and how to do the funding. We've also done that with another organization in Peru. They are a little more advanced, and also with regard to conservation in Venezuela. In our opinion, it seems to be more efficient. We always have to follow things up. Without this follow-up, things are not going to be efficient. We're talking about direct financing, and it's not just, giving the money over or giving the money over to the entrepreneur. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about work that is aligned with discipline and articulation, so that this funding will get there and it will be efficient. So we are starting because we were very critical, and they did not get to this in the Amazon, and they didn't get to the populations, but this is a direct participation and generating access to all of them. And of course, we hope that it's going to be as from the the life of this indigenous population. So it has to be structured and disciplined so that this will generate the impact that we hope for. That's what we have done. We have a regional incubator with enterprises to support all of these processes. We have the regional program for indigenous economy that also includes all of that. And we continue to work with platforms, working with other nationalities and showing them how we work with the indigenous economy. So we're starting, and since this is a fad right now, we're starting slowly, but with a lot of responsibility so we don't make any mistakes, because we don't want to fail. We don't want to repeat a failure in the Amazon as we've had before. And that's why we have several partners. Everybody from the Pan-Amazonic Network and Bioeconomy, they are our partners, they are our allies, and they're extremely important for us to be able to move forward. Thank you, Fany. And 2 points called my attention out of your answer. The first one is, how do you do this as a network, connecting other players so that you can do this in a more sustainable and long-lasting way? So you can't do things by yourself. There is a collective action. You have to have the presence of other players. And another important point, this is part of the question that I'm going to ask Aldo, is, the organizations that receive the money, they should continue, they should be an inspiration for other initiatives. They are not models of failure, they are models of prosperity, and then we're able to have a good life for the people who live in the region. So congratulations, and we're going to be able to have good results, very positive results. And so we're talking about some sustainable funding mechanisms by the Amazonia Impact Ventures. Nowadays, you have 15 companies that receive this credit. So could you tell us how this strategy works? Yes, Marcos. Of course, we work with several cooperatives and associations and small and medium-sized companies with their value chains and products that are originally from the Amazon. So we believe that we have an opportunity and the need, because many of these products that come from the Amazon, they end up coming because of the deforestation. And we believe that we have to work with the value chains, and especially if it's with Amazonian products. So in the case of Peru, we have in the Amazon, we have cocoa and coffee. We have a very high altitude, and we have been funding these production chains, but also in encouraging these organizations so that they can actually reduce the the destruction of the forests and also with deteriorated areas. So we were talking to more than 50 different cooperatives. And of course, beyond our experience with the rural funding that our team has, and part of our team created and has managed companies. The co-founder of my company, he is an entrepreneur. He has several companies in different countries. And with all of this experience compiled, we try to connect this to the work and to our approach. And we understood with these interviews, with the listening, we listened to people, and they told us that they needed not specifically large and complex projects. They didn't need credit for that, or because they needed large innovative projects. What they really needed was working capital to be able to operate and to be able to grow. So we can create a bigger impact with this kind of credit for working capital, for example. So we began by implementing this credit line associated to the impact. And what we do today is work with these companies after an evaluation and an analysis of the level of sustainability that they have and the value chain as well. And we identify fragile points and areas of opportunity that can come up that can be interesting. There are targets that impact all of these projects, and we have, the funding if these targets are complied with. So we align the incentives with them and with these companies in the value chain, and we also do a follow-up of all this. There's also the technical assistance so that these companies can achieve their targets. And we also provide an incentive in the rates, the interest rates, for example, that we have worked with. And we do this to be able to offer this the capital, the working capital that they need. Great, thank you. So besides bringing investment and capital to the working capital so that things will work, you also provide technical assistance, whether it's specific or only for management, for the governance. Well, we provide the funding, and we also provide at the same time the technical assistance for these organizations that want this or need this technical assistance. And it's worth mentioning that the financial planning, financial management in areas of sustainability. Another important point I wanted to mention that it's very important is access to markets, because many of these organizations, many times they are still small and they end up depending for many years on a specific buyer. So they were able to have a good connection with buyer X that always buys volume X, but suddenly if the connection is lost, the company is lost too. So it's important to generate market access for these companies so that we can also help them so they can increase their customers, their customer portfolio. So it's not only funding the producers, but also providing them access to the market so that they can work with ethical buyers, and they will have the mission of being able to help these small producers. So many of these buyers, sometimes they're not in Latin America. Maybe they can be in the United States, in Europe, and we try to make this connection between them, between the entities, so that everything will work, so that these small producers will have access to the market and the markets will have access to these producers of the Amazon. And that's how we try to do this work. So it's not only stimulating the value chain, but also allowing it to spread out. And we know that it's an important project. There's a special origin, but we have to connect this with ethical buyers, people who want to make this get there to people who value these products and thinking about climatic changes as well. Great, thank you very much. So what you said in terms of market access is very important, because otherwise the product doesn't go anywhere, right? And you created this whole value chain and it does not find the market, it doesn't find the end buyers. And this is also, according to what Fany said, it's an action that is multi-sectorial, right? It invites several other players for this market to be able to have this opening in the market. And Fany, in your initial presentation, you said that one of the strategic targets that you have is to work with public policies. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about how this has worked, how this experience has worked of having funding for indigenous people and involving the public policies and the public sector in this discussion. And especially because you are in different countries with different realities. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about this experience. Well, so this is work that needs to be done. So we are doing it, and it's small actions with public workers, and it is possible to support the indigenous economy. And we realized over time that there were obstacles that could come up, just like Aldo said. We need to have these markets go, these products going to the markets, right? It's not easy to do that. There are countries nowadays that have the integration in their public policies, projects with women, especially in Colombia. So in the Amazon, they have encouraged this with conservation. So many times it's part of the governmental strategies. So it's very important to know how we can compile these experiences and think about these experiences so that this will be permanent in the public policies of the respective governments. And all of this will become public state policy. So this is the path that we've been following. We have to work a lot. I'm not saying it's not a lot of work, and we have to work a lot to be able to have the reception by the governments. So it's not easy, we know that. And that's why we have to think not only about everything to be included in the state policy, but also for the indigenous population to have the right of self-determination, for them also to have the right to have their own public policies. So therefore, it is important to think about their own economy, the indigenous economy, that looks for a dignified life for them in the Amazon. So this has to start by thinking about a fair market in the Amazon, not only thinking about a consumer, a European consumer or a North American consumer. No, you also have to start thinking about our region. Our region. So this product comes out of the Amazon, it can be consumed in the Amazon as well, and it has to be consumed with quality, with pertinence, with all of the elements with which we produce, and for us to be able to avoid bringing things from abroad that they're very expensive, and we can consume our own things from inside. And this is going to prevent lots of repercussions in the world today. So we have to try and transform the Amazon, many aspects that we have been working with. So the daily consumption products. So that's feasible. It is possible to have an Amazonian commerce from the Amazon to the Amazon, so right inside. And we can offer this. We can offer maybe things for our own economy. We can also offer things for our region. That's why we think about the Amazonian economy, an Amazonian economy for the people in the Amazon. And then for people outside the Amazon region, right? And the inhabitants, the indigenous populations, the people who are in the neighboring areas, the neighboring communities. We are in the Amazon and we have to generate our own economy. That's fantastic, Fany. Fantastic that you said that, because it's not only moving the economy in the Amazon, it's also the salvage of the culture, because you're going to end up going back to consuming something that was consumed, generations before yours, right? So we consume a lot of products from outside the region, and all of this was a movement for us to start consuming these products. And this movement that you're talking about of the Amazon buying from the Amazon, this is also, goes back to this culture. We're going to go back to consuming these Amazonian products, and how this resource is going to feed in and make new business and new initiatives come up, because this market, this internal market, would already be able to increase the growth of this region, right? So, Aldo, You brought
direcionamento desse
the direction of the investment, but I would like you to talk a little bit about how you select the companies that are going to receive the investments and what kind of indicators you use to evaluate the impact of this investment, of this funding.
Sí, de repente antes para comentar lo que mencionaba
Well,
Fany,
I wanted to
realmente es importante
talk about what Fany was saying. It's really very important.
de cada uno de nuestros países.
It's important for us to have an internal market in all of our countries. In the case of Brazil, having an internal, huge internal market and several Amazonian products that can be sold in Brazil, just like other Amazonian countries. We observe that it's not always, people don't even know what acai is, right? So they started consuming acai because it came from the United States, but in fact, acai was always there in the Amazon, and they didn't know it was already theirs, and it is possible and it's necessary to educate people so that they will consume what is theirs, because sometimes they don't even see what's in their own backyard. So we're talking about our products, but they are good products and they are good for our health and they're very nutritious. So we try to work with companies that have a solid business model. And for this, it is obvious that we identify them with the collaboration of other NGOs, local NGOs, other acceleration programs that are promoted by the governments and other cooperation agencies. And we start a relationship, and we start by visiting these companies, and we feed this relationship to know exactly what they're like, because we're interested in working with them. And as they commented before, all of the credits are defined based on concrete targets that maybe could be this could be X, and this is what they need to export the product. And we define a specific number of areas that are going to be reforested, or trees that are going to be planted in these properties to be able to strengthen the producer areas. And as we said before, in Peru, for example, we have these targets in mind with biodiversity indicators. And this is very interesting for us because these organizations, specifically with this company that we have worked with, an association of local producers, they are monitoring the diversity of their forests, and they are placing cameras with traps to identify the species, so doing participative monitoring with the producer. So all of these credits come in, they are connected to these targets, and they can be verified later on. Okay, this was complied with, that was complied with, and in this way, we are able to encourage things to be complied with. And of course, if it doesn't happen, it could be partially complied with. So we have to think about that as well. And then we make a partial payment based on these targets that were achieved. Great. Wow, lots of questions, but we're already going to the final moments. So Fany, before my last question, I would like you to talk a little bit about something that called my attention in your presentation. It's about the decision of the governance of this shared responsibility. I thought that was very interesting because the donors also participate in this decision of where the investment goes. And I'd like you to tell us how this works. So what this has been in practice, what your experience has been like. Well, the experience we've had up to now, we have been trying to enhance the indigenous bioeconomy, but thinking about international cooperation, I believe that what I've seen up to now is that they are not worried about what can be generated, And these donations are going to provide impacts or it will generate changes in the territory. I don't see that. What I see is that they're concerned with the reports, for the rules to be followed. So this is a very colonialist view, and this has to change so that we can actually have responsible funding with the communities, with the indigenous communities, the Quilombola communities as well, communities that sometimes have not received the investments because if there are several requirements for the funding, it's very difficult for them to be able to achieve all of these requirements. So we have to decolonize this mindset so that we can actually generate an impact in the communities and territories, because sometimes these rules, they impose things and they impose a supposed need for this community, but it's not a real need of the communities. So sometimes this is what happens. And in general, cooperation demands lots of requirements, and then it becomes almost impossible for this to be addressed. So that the so that there is the generation of, a situation where they don't listen to the indigenous people. In my experience, with regard to funding and cooperation, we need to have follow-up, yes, of course. And we also need to send this to see if it's actually getting to where it has to get. So we're not only talking about reports and if the indicator was addressed. No, the fact that we have to, well, sometimes we have some requirements that are just very difficult to achieve or impossible to achieve. And it should be different in these cases. It should be transforming. It should be something efficient and transparent. And that generates changes in the Amazon and also for us. And this is the only way we're going to be able to move forward. If we continue the way it's being done up to now, beautiful discourses, beautiful indicators, and beautiful demands, but in fact, things are just the same. The people in the territory are just the same. So we have to change our mindset so that we can improve not only the lives of the people in the territory, but everybody who is involved, the whole of the Amazon. Receives this impact. If people begin to have a dignified life, this is also spread out to the neighboring areas and the whole country. But I think we still have a lot of work to do. I have a lot of hope, and I believe that things can change. I know that things are contradictory when we think about cooperation of the people in the Amazon, and I have my own opinions about this. I don't know if that's what you wanted to know, but I tried to answer things. The people have to be responsible, people who are doing it. Okay, great. And I have a certain I'm a little anxious about these evaluation things because these models, they are not according to the Amazon, right? So we have to think about the models themselves, what kind of rules they're using, what due diligence process they're going to use to know if the organization is going to have access to the capital. And that's why we need to have a diversity of the capital for the region. So the model with a single mechanism doesn't have to be a single mechanism because it won't be able to supply all the demands. So talking about mechanisms and investment, I would like you to tell us how we can mobilize more capital for the Amazon. So a little bit of your experience, the focus of Amazonia Impact Ventures. So mobilizing the capital, how do we do more of that? How can we make them really access what they need?
Yo creo que un tema clave, Marcus, es
I believe this is a very important subject. And we have, first of all, the will, and We also see, I know that everybody wants to channel their resources in the Amazon, but we also have to run risks when we talk about the people who invest, the people who manage the channeling of the capital. So in the morning, I was listening to Figueroa. He was talking about all the challenges that they face in funding for the Amazon. So he's talking about the smaller tickets and the lack of training, or the automation of certain projects and several other things. So of course we know about this. We know that there is a risk perception that is very high, and the people who make, coming from the people who make the investments, but people do this without knowing the lack of capacity, the of the organizations, and also the investors. When we sometimes we don't know how this works, how we should do this in the Amazon. That's why I believe it's important to observe this side as well. So the great banks that do funding, and also financial development organizations. So it's important for us for them to have this ability to observe this and react quickly to channel the resources. We consider and we see that very little funding can be channeled to the Amazon. What little goes, it's basically for what is more well known. 80%, for example, of the funding in Peru happens, they're from the sociolanders, and this is for coffee and cocoa, basically. 80% goes to that. And 80% of the coffee and 90% is coffee and cocoa. So we have a whole sector of products that come from the forest, so forest products, and there's nothing being done about them. So, for example, we in the Amazon, we have açaí, camu-camu, buriti, as they say in Brazil. There are many products that do not receive funding, and the smaller ones are the ones who need more help, more support. So it is necessary to think about this capital and also the education. It's a two-way street. We have to educate the people who have capital and also the people who will receive this capital. And we also need to have the will to risk things and thinking about mobilizing more capital for the Amazon for these points. So maybe it's not an investment, a safe investment, let's say, as many do in the United States and Europe, but we have to do it. It's a necessary investment because we need to encourage the region. Yes, it definitely makes sense, right? How we diversify those who receive it so that we don't concentrate all of the capital in only one economic product. So we're coming to the end, and I would like to open up so that you can leave your final remarks, your message about bioeconomy, and what kind of message would you like to give to our audience today and the people who are going to access this video later on? Fany, your microphone is off. Yes, okay. So anyway, I'm going to repeat what I said about Belém do Pará, what was said there. We want an economy with forests and thinking about the indigenous population. So how can we have a dignified life, respectfully using the natural resources, respecting our biodiversity and our ecosystem? We have to learn to live just like the indigenous people who kept these forests alive, kept them standing during centuries, using them respectfully, and we have to continue doing that. We have to articulate knowledge and technology and make an Amazonian economy. So thinking about an Amazonian economy that depends on a fragile ecosystem and that possibly will get to the point of no return if we don't work out the actual measures, the adequate measures in this sector.
Muito obrigado, Fany.
Thank you very much, Fany. So, Aldo, what is your final remark?
Bueno, primero agradecerles a todos por
Well, first of all, I would like to thank all of you
muy interesante.
for being here in this forum. It's a very interesting forum, and hopefully you'll be able to listen to the next conversations. And I'd just like to say that we're going to get to $10 million in credit for different companies in the Amazon, and we are raising the first fund. So if we have any investors and that want to make an impact, please contact us. And if there are companies that are also interested in the Amazon for technical assistance, so please contact us, and we're going to be very happy to meet you. We need more capital, and I think that this kind of space gives us the opportunity to be able to talk about what is being done, the needs, and also the solutions. So thank you very much once again, Marcos and Fany. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Obrigado, Fany. Obrigado, Aldo.
Thank you, Fany. Thank you, Aldo. We had a great conversation. I'd just like to leave the final points of what you said. Sharing knowledge is never too much for us to be able to get resources for the Amazonian economy. We need to have local participation. We have to bring the population that lives in the Amazon, indigenous communities, quilombolas, the ones who live by the riverside. And our activity has to happen in a network. Otherwise, we don't go very far. We're not going to be able to do things by ourselves. And this impact has to be measured in some way. And we have to encourage this business, and we have to also open up a market, and we have to spread it out in our internal market as well, because the Amazon needs to consume Amazonian products, and there's a positive impact there. And we have to change the mindset of those who live in the Amazon. So people have to want to run a little more risk, because the impact is more positive and long lasting after it happens. So once again, thank you very much. I would like to thank all of you who are listening to us and sharing this moment with us. I'd like to thank Rede for conducting this event, and BG for the invitation. And Fany and Aldo, thank you once again.
Muchas gracias a todos.